My name is Paige Whitaker. I'm 35, and at my grandfather's will, reading my family handed my sister a check for $6.9 million and slid me a single-dollar bill across the table. My mother laughed when she saw my face. My father said, "Go earn your own." Then my mother leaned in, smiling like she'd waited years to say it, and told the whole room, "Some kids just don't measure up." Lauren waved her check. My parents toasted with the lawyer's bad coffee. I let them laugh. I picked up the dollar and I said thank you, because I knew what was still sitting in the lawyer's folder, and they didn't. There was one more document, a letter my grandfather wrote in his own hand and asked to be read out loud. 40 seconds after the lawyer opened it, my mother stopped laughing for good. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the granddaughter who opened the store at 6 every morning and never told a soul what she carried finally gets to tell you what was waiting in that lawyer's folder. If you've ever been handed a dollar while someone else got the millions, stay right here. Because the old man had one more thing to say. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. 4 years before that dollar, I was a high school teacher. I taught business and shop in a town 2 hours north, and I was good at it. And I thought that was my whole life. Then my grandfather fell. I want you to understand who I became after that, because my family never bothered to find out. I'm the kind of person who, when something needs doing, just does it, quietly, and doesn't announce it. That sounds like a virtue. It's actually a weakness, and it cost me for years, because I let everyone assume I disappeared into some small sad life out in the country. I didn't correct them. I've never been good at saying, "Here is everything I carry." I just carried it. My grandfather, Earl Whitaker, owned a hardware and lumber store that had stood on the main street of our town for 50 years. Whitaker Hardware. Everyone in 3 counties knew it. When I was a girl, I did my homework on the counter while he cut keys and gave kids free penny candy. That store was the steadiest thing in my childhood. Steadier than my parents' marriage, steadier than anything. So when Pop got sick, and the question became, who would keep the lights on and who would keep him safe, I didn't hold a family meeting about it. I gave notice at my school in the middle of a semester, packed my car, and drove back to the little cottage behind his farmhouse. My mother told her friends I'd thrown my career away. My father didn't say much at all. Neither of them asked what it actually took. They'd find out eventually in a lawyer's office, when a dead man's letter said it for me. Let me tell you about the store, because the store is the whole story. Whitaker Hardware opened at 6 in the morning, every morning, the way it had since 1974. Farmers came in before dawn for parts that would save their whole day. Pop believed a hardware store was a promise to a town, and you didn't break a promise just because the sun wasn't up yet. When I moved back, I started opening it. 6 a.m., key in the lock, lights on, coffee going, the smell of cut wood and machine oil. I'd do the store, then go check on Pop, then back to the store, then back to Pop. He still came in when he could, slower every month, and he'd sit on the stool by the register and watch me ring people up. And one morning he said something I never forgot. "You know how I'll always know who this place belongs to?" he said. "It belongs to whoever opens it every morning." I thought he was being sentimental. He wasn't. He was telling me something, plainly, the way he told me everything, and I was too tired and too used to being overlooked to hear the whole weight of it. The store wasn't fancy. Some months it barely cleared its own costs, but it employed 4 people in a town that didn't have many jobs, and it kept a 50-year promise, and it had my grandfather's name over the door. To my parents, it was a dusty building sitting on land that could be sold. To me and to Pop, it was the realest thing our family had ever built. Those 2 ways of seeing it were about to collide in a lawyer's office, with a dead man holding the gavel. The fall came on a Tuesday in October, 4 years ago. Pop slipped on the loading dock at the store, and at the hospital they didn't just set his wrist. They watched the way his hand trembled, and they ran tests. And the word came back Parkinson's. He was 84 then. The doctor was kind and direct. Pop could live a good while yet, but he'd need more help every year, and he could not run a 50-year-old business and manage a disease at the same time. Somebody had to step in. I was on the phone in the hospital hallway within the hour, calling my parents, calling my sister. My mother said, "Oh, that's so hard, honey, but you know your father and I can't just drop everything. We have the house. We have our lives." My sister Lauren, who lived in the city 90 minutes away with no children and a job she complained about, said she'd try to come up when things settled down. Things never settled down for Lauren. There was always a trip, a new apartment, a reason. I stood in that hallway and did the math everyone in my situation eventually does. There were 3 of us who could have stepped up. There was one of me who would. I didn't resent it that first day. I want to be honest about that. I loved Pop, and I'd have chosen him over a semester of lesson plans every time. What I resented, what built slowly over the next 4 years like water behind a dam, was the way my family treated my showing up as proof that I had less of a life to interrupt. As if being the reliable one meant I was worth less, not more. My parents visited Pop maybe 3 times a year, and I started to notice a pattern in those visits. They never asked how he was sleeping, or whether his medication was working, or if he was lonely in the evenings. They asked about the land. The first time it happened plainly, my father stood at the window of the farmhouse looking out at the 40 acres behind the store and said, to no one in particular, "You know what that acreage is worth now? With the new highway going in?" My mother picked it up like a dropped thread. "Earl, have you thought about what happens to all this? You don't want it to be a burden on the kids." She said the kids. She meant the money. Pop, who was sharper than any of them gave him credit for, just said, "I've thought about everything, Lorraine. Don't you worry." And he winked at me across the room, and I didn't understand the wink yet. They were already counting it. Every visit. The same careful circling. What's the store bringing in? What's the land appraised at? Have you talked to anyone about selling? They framed it as concern. The way people do when they want something but need to feel generous about wanting it. And every time I'd watch Pop deflect. And I'd watch them leave a little frustrated, and I'd go back to opening the store at 6 and crushing his pills into applesauce at night. I didn't say anything to them. That was my mistake. And my nature both. I just filed it away. The way I file everything away, and I kept watching. Because I was starting to understand that when Pop was gone, the people who never came would arrive with their hands out, and somebody needed to be paying attention. Lauren came around more than my parents, but only because Lauren needed money more than my parents did. She'd show up every few months, always with a crisis, always with a number, a car repair, a deposit, a bridge until the next paycheck. And every time she'd find a quiet moment with Pop, and she'd come out with a check. I never begrudged Pop helping her. It was his money and his heart. What got me was the way she talked about the store on her way out the door. "I don't know how you stand it here," she said to me once, in the parking lot, sliding a check into her purse. "This dusty little money pit. You gave up a real career for this?" The store had just cut a key for a single mother who'd locked herself out of her house at midnight, and Pop's name was over the door, and my sister called it a dusty money pit while she pocketed his money. I said something neutral. I always said something neutral. But I remember standing there watching her drive off and thinking, "You see a money pit, and I see the only thing this family ever built that was worth keeping." We were looking at the same building and seeing opposite things, and one of us was going to be very surprised someday about which view Pop shared. I went back inside, and Pop was at the register, and he'd heard the whole thing through the open door. He didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "Money runs through some people like water through a sieve, Paige. You hold things. That's different." I thought it was just a kind thing to say to a tired granddaughter. It was a clue. I kept missing the clues. The full insult, the one that became a kind of family anthem, came at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. We were all at the farmhouse, and I'd cooked, because of course I'd cooked, and I'd also given Pop his evening medications between the turkey and the pie, because of course I had. Lauren was telling everyone about a promotion that I'm fairly sure never actually happened. My mother was glowing at her, and then the conversation turned to me, the way it always did, like a spotlight swinging to the corner of the room nobody wanted to look at. "And how's the little store, Paige?" my mother asked, in that voice. I said it was good. Steady. She made a small sound, a sort of pitying hum. "I just think it's such a shame," she said, to the table, not to me. "You had a teaching career, a real profession, and you threw it away to play shopkeeper in the middle of nowhere." She shook her head. "I love you, honey, but I'll be honest. Some kids just don't measure up to their potential. That's just life." The table went quiet for a second. Then somebody passed the gravy, and the moment closed over like water. Nobody defended me. My father studied his plate, and I sat there with the taste of my own cooking in my mouth, and I understood, fully and finally, how my mother measured a human being. Dollars, titles, the story you could tell at a party. By that math, I was a failure, and Lauren was a success. And the fact that I was keeping her father-in-law's father alive and his life's work breathing didn't enter the calculation at all. I didn't argue. I just thought, one day, the math is going to get corrected. I had no idea Pop had already done the correcting. That winter, Pop got worried, and his worry is what started everything. We were sitting in the farmhouse kitchen one night, him with his tea, me with my exhaustion, and he was having one of his clear evenings, the kind where the disease stepped back and let him be entirely himself. "Paige," he said, "when I'm gone, they're going to come for the store." He didn't have to say who, we both knew. "Your father will want to sell the land, Lauren will want her cut in cash, and they'll do it fast, before the ground's even settled, because they don't see what it is, they see what it's worth." I said I knew. He looked at me a long time. "I built that place from nothing. My father ran a stall, I ran a store, and I always thought one of mine would keep it going. But it isn't going to be your father, and it sure isn't going to be Lauren." He set his cup down. "It's been you for 4 years. 6 in the morning. Every morning. I see it." Then he asked me the question that changed my life. "If I make sure it goes to you, the right way, so nobody can break it, will you keep it open?" I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the weight of it, because keeping a 50-year promise is not a gift, it's a job, and it doesn't come with $6.9 million. But I looked at the man who'd been the steadiest thing in my life, and I said yes. And I said something else, the practical thing, the thing my family would later twist into proof I'd schemed. I said, "If we're going to do this, Pop, we have to do it so airtight that nobody can ever claim you weren't yourself when you decided." I knew what my family would do if Pop simply left me the store in his will. They'd say he was sick. They'd say the Parkinsons had taken his mind. They'd say I'd manipulated a vulnerable old man, and they'd drag it through a courtroom for years. And they might even win, because juries feel sorry for grieving families, and a quiet granddaughter makes an easy villain. I'd watched enough of the world to know that the truth doesn't defend itself. You have to build a wall around it while you still can. So I told Pop we needed a lawyer, a real estate and estate attorney, someone with no connection to the family. And I told him we needed his doctor involved, on the record, certifying that he knew exactly what he was doing. He laughed at me, a little. "You're thorough," he said. "Pop," I said, "I learned it from watching this family circle your land for 3 years." He stopped laughing and nodded. The next week, I drove him to the office of a lawyer named Howard Lind, and I sat in the waiting room while they talked, because I didn't want to be in the room, didn't want anyone to ever say I'd been whispering in his ear. What they decided in that office, over the next 2 months, is the thing my parents never saw coming. It was sitting in Howard Lind's files the whole time they were planning how to spend their inheritance. Here is what they did, 2 years before the will reading, while Pop could still drive himself to town. They didn't put the store in his will. Putting it in a will would have been the weak way, the contestable way. Instead, Howard Lind structured a sale, a buy-sell agreement. Pop sold Whitaker Hardware and the 40 acres to me at a fair appraised value, while he was alive and certifiably of sound mind. I couldn't pay 6 figures in cash, obviously. So the agreement was built the way family business transfers often are. I signed a promissory note. I'd pay it down over years, out of the store's profits and my own labor, the same way Pop's own father had passed things down. In plain terms, I bought the store. I'm still paying for it. It was not a gift that fell out of the sky. It was a debt I took on willingly, with my name on a note, and my 6 in the mornings as the down payment. And the crucial part, the part Pop insisted on, was the medical certification. His physician, Dr. Nessa Holt, examined him and documented in writing that on the day he signed, Earl Whitaker understood the nature and consequences of the transaction completely. Howard had it notarized. He had witnesses. He built the wall exactly as high as I'd asked him to, and then a little higher. When it was done, Pop shook my hand like we'd closed a deal at the lumber counter, which I suppose we had. "Now they can scream all they want," he said. "It's done, and it's clean." I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents. Not Lauren. Not even my closest friend. I just kept opening the store at 6. People ask me why I didn't say anything for 2 whole years, why I let my mother call me a failure at holiday dinners when I was holding a deed she'd have killed for. The answer is strategy, and it's the part of myself I'm least sure how to feel about. I knew that the moment I announced the store was mine, the war would start, and it would start while Pop was still alive and fragile. My parents would pressure him. They'd corner him on his bad days, the days the disease fogged him, and they'd try to get him to fix it, to undo it, to be fair. And the stress might break him faster than the Parkinson's. Or they'd lawyer up early and start building a case that he'd been incompetent, and every month that passed with the disease progressing would make that case easier to argue. The wall Howard built was strongest if nobody attacked it until Pop was gone, and the medical record was frozen in time, dated back to when he was clearly sound. So I stayed quiet. I absorbed the insults. I let them count their inheritance out loud at my grandfather's bedside, and I poured his applesauce, and I said nothing, because silence was the only way to protect both the man and the promise. It was the loneliest 2 years of my life. There were nights I wanted to scream the truth across the dinner table just to watch their faces. I never did. I'd learned from watching my family that the people who talk the most usually have the least, and the ones who hold their cards tend to keep their houses. So I held mine, and I waited for a room with a lawyer in it. I don't want to skip over those 2 years like they were just a waiting room, because they were the hardest and best years I've had. Caring for someone you love as they fade is a strange kind of privilege. The mornings were the store. The evenings were Pop. I learned to read his medication windows like weather, the good hours and the hard ones. I learned which stories he wanted on the bad nights, the one about the flood of '78, the one about meeting my grandmother at a church social. I bathed him when he couldn't, and I never once let him feel ashamed about it, because shame is the cruelest thing you can add to a body that's already betraying someone. Meanwhile, Lauren posted photos from a beach in Mexico and tagged it, "Treat yourself." My mother sent a card on his birthday and didn't visit. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because at the will reading, those same people would sit across a table and act like they had any standing at all to talk about what Pop wanted, when not one of them had sat with him through a single hard night. There's a particular anger that builds in a caregiver, quiet and deep, and it isn't really about the money. It's about the audacity. The audacity of people who send a card and then expect to inherit a kingdom. I never let that anger run me. I'd learned that the angry one in the room is the one who loses control of it. But I kept it, banked it, the way you bank a fire overnight so there's still heat in the morning. I was going to need it warm for one particular afternoon in Howard Lynn's office. Near the end, on one of his last clear nights, Pop gave me a tin box. It was an old one, the kind that used to hold hard candy, dented at one corner, and he kept it in the bottom drawer of his dresser. He put it in my hands with both of his, the way you hand someone something that matters. "When Howard calls everyone in to read the will," he said, "you bring this. Don't open it before then unless you have to, and don't let them see it until the lawyer's done his part." His voice was thin that night, but his eyes were absolutely clear. "Promise me you'll let the lawyer read my letter out loud. All of it, in front of everyone." I promised. I asked him what was in the box, and he just smiled. That lumber counter smile, the smile of a man who'd closed a good deal. "Insurance," he said. "And the truth, in case anybody's forgotten how to recognize it." He died 11 days later in his own bed, in the farmhouse, with me holding his hand and the store key in my pocket because I'd opened up that morning like always. The last thing he said to me wasn't profound, it was, "Did you get the dock light fixed?" I told him I had. He nodded, satisfied, like a man whose affairs were in order, which they were, more than anyone but me and Howard Lind knew. I sat with him a long time after. Then I went home to the cottage, and I put the tin box on my kitchen table, and I looked at it for an hour without opening it. I'd promised to wait, but I was starting to understand that my grandfather had built me something stronger than a store. He'd built me a way to finally be seen. I broke my promise a little. 2 days before the reading, I opened the tin box, because I needed to know what I was walking into. I'm going to tell you exactly what was inside, because I want you to hold it in your mind for the rest of this, the way I've held it ever since. 3 things. The first was a copy of the buy-sell agreement, the one I'd signed 2 years before, transferring Whitaker Hardware and the 40 acres to me. Pop's signature, my signature, Howard's stamp, the date in clear black ink from a time when no one could pretend his mind was gone. The second was Dr. Holt's certification, her professional letterhead, her statement that on the day of signing my grandfather understood completely what he was doing, the wall, in 2 pages, and the third thing was a note, handwritten, on a torn half sheet of the store's order paper, the kind we used at the lumber counter. His handwriting had gotten shaky by then, but every word was legible, and I've read it 1,000 times since. The store stays with whoever opens it every morning. I changed nothing on my deathbed. I changed it while I could still drive. Anybody who calls that manipulation never once made the drive themselves. Love, Pop. I sat at my kitchen table and I didn't cry. Not right then. I just felt something settle into place, something that had been crooked my whole life, finally going straight. He hadn't left me the store. People kept saying it that way later, that he left it to me, and it always made me correct them. He didn't leave it to me in a will, soft and contestable. He sold it to me, on paper, 2 years before anyone was watching, and then he sat back and let my family count their money out loud, knowing the whole time that the thing they actually wanted was already gone. The dollar they'd hand me wasn't the insult, it was the punchline. Let me make sure the pieces are clear because this is where people get confused. There were 2 separate things in my grandfather's estate. There was the money, the liquid stuff, the investment accounts, and the savings and a life insurance policy, and all together that came to about $6.9 million. That money was never the store. Pop had been a careful man for 60 years, and careful men in small towns sometimes have more set aside than anyone guesses. He left every dollar of that cash to my parents and to Lauren. He genuinely wanted them to have it. And then there was the store, and the land, the legacy, the name over the door, the 50-year promise. That he'd already sold to me, 2 years prior, clean and documented and walled off from the will entirely. So when Howard read the will at the reading, the will would only cover the cash. The will would say, Lauren and my parents get the millions, and Paige gets $1. A symbolic dollar Pop insisted on, so that no one could ever say he'd cut me out completely or forgotten me. To everyone in that room who didn't know about the buy-sell, it would look like Pop had judged me and found me wanting. It would look like the failure daughter got $1. And my family would feast on that for exactly as long as it took Howard to reach the second envelope. I understood, sitting at my kitchen table with the tin box open, that I was about to be publicly humiliated and then publicly vindicated, in that order, in front of my whole family, by a dead man with a sense of timing. I decided I would not say a word during the humiliation. I'd let them have it, because the letter was going to do all the talking I'd swallowed for 2 years. The funeral came first, and the funeral told me everything about who my family was. I'd handled all of it, the arrangements, the flowers, the photo boards, the casseroles, because that's what I do. And at the service, my parents and Lauren performed Grief like it was an audition. My mother wept beautifully into a handkerchief for the people watching. Lauren posted a black and white photo of Pop with a caption about her biggest inspiration, a man she'd visited maybe 4 times in 4 years. They accepted condolences like the chief mourners, the devoted family, and I let them, because a funeral isn't the place to keep score. I stood off to the side and shook the hands of the people who actually knew him, the farmers, the regulars, the man whose key I'd cut at midnight, and they all said the same thing. Your grandfather loved that store. And, thank God you kept it open for him. My family heard none of that, because they weren't standing where the truth was standing. At the reception, my mother found me by the coffee urn and put her hand on my arm, and for a second I thought she might say something real. Instead, she said, low, so only I could hear. I hope you're not expecting anything from the estate page. You know how your grandfather felt about choices like yours. Some kids just don't measure up, and that's nobody's fault but their own. She squeezed my arm, gentle as a knife, and walked back to her audience. I stood there with my paper cup of bad coffee and I thought, you have no idea what's in a tin box on my kitchen table. And for the first time in 2 years, the silence I'd been keeping didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a loaded thing, waiting. The reading was set for the following week, and in the days before it, my parents could not stop coaching me about how little I should expect. It would have been funny if it weren't so revealing. My father called, which he never did, and in his careful, uncomfortable way told me, now, Paige, your grandfather was old-fashioned. He believed in rewarding, the kind of success the world recognizes. Don't take it personally if the will reflects that. My mother was less gentle. Lauren has real expenses, a real life, she said. If Pop left the bulk to her, it's because she'll do something with it. I just don't want you making a scene at the lawyer's office when you hear the numbers. A scene. She was worried I'd make a scene. I almost laughed out loud. They were so certain of the story they'd written, the one where I was the disappointment and Lauren was the prize, that they spent a week managing my feelings about an outcome that existed only in their heads. They thought they were preparing me to be gracious about my own erasure, and I let them think it. I won't make a scene, I told my mother, and I meant it completely. I had no intention of making a scene. I was going to sit perfectly still and let a lawyer and a dead man make the scene for me. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from knowing something the people insulting you don't know. It's not smugness exactly. It's more like standing on solid ground during an earthquake and watching everyone else stumble. I felt it growing in me all week. By the morning of the reading, I was the calmest I'd been in 2 years. I put the tin box in my bag, and I drove to Howard Lynn's office, and I waited for them to laugh. The night before the reading, Lauren showed up at my cottage, which she'd visited exactly twice in 4 years. She brought a bottle of wine and a soft voice, and she called it making peace. I just feel like we've grown apart, she said, settling onto my couch like she lived there. I want us to be close again, especially now, with Pop gone. I made tea and let her talk, because I've learned that people tell you why they came if you give them enough quiet. It took her about 20 minutes to get there. Did Pop ever, give you anything to hold on to? She asked, too casually, swirling her wine. Papers? Or instructions? I just want to make sure everything's in order for tomorrow. For the family. There it was. She wasn't here to reconnect. She was here to find out whether I was holding a card. Some instinct in her, or maybe something my mother had said, had snagged on the possibility that the quiet sister might not be as empty-handed as the story required. I looked at her over my tea and I told her the truth, which was also the perfect lie. Pop and I talked a lot, Lauren, I said. About the store, mostly. About keeping it open. All true. She relaxed, visibly, deciding I was exactly the sentimental loser she needed me to be. That's sweet, she said, and finished her wine and left without helping me wash the cups. I stood at my sink and almost felt sorry for her. Almost. because tomorrow she was going to walk into that office certain she'd already won, and she was going to find out that the sister she'd come to interrogate had been holding the only card that mattered the entire time. I rinsed the cups. I slept like a stone. In the parking lot of Howard Lynn's office the next morning, my mother caught me before I went in. She was dressed like she was attending her own coronation, and she took my hands in both of hers with a tenderness that always meant she wanted something. "Paige," she said, "promise me you'll let your sister have this. She needs it. You've always been so strong, so independent. You don't need things the way she does." She smiled, warm and total. "After everything, just let her have her moment. Don't make this hard. I want you to notice the move, because it's the oldest one in our family." She'd spent 2 years telling me I didn't measure up, that I was a failure, that I'd thrown my life away. And now, in the same breath, she was telling me I was so strong I didn't need anything. The insult and the flattery were the same tool. Both of them existed to make sure I'd take less and stay quiet about it. I looked at my mother, at the genuine belief in her face that I was a problem to be managed, and I felt the last of my old hunger for her approval finally die. Not with anger, just quietly, the way a pilot light goes out. "I won't make it hard, Mom," I said. And I meant it. The way a person means a thing the other person will completely misunderstand. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to fight or shout or grab. I was going to walk into that room and sit down and let a folder full of paper do what 2 years of dinners never could. She squeezed my hands, satisfied, and we walked in together, my mother believing she'd just talked her failure daughter into one more act of surrender. Howard Lynn's office smelled like old paper and lemon polish. He was a careful man in his 60s, the kind who reads every line before he speaks it, and when I'd checked in with him by phone that week, he'd walked me through exactly how the reading would go. He would read the will first, he said, the distribution of the financial estate. Then, per my grandfather's explicit written instruction, he would read aloud a final letter in full to everyone present. He told me he'd handle the buy-sell documentation himself, that he had the originals, and that I wouldn't need to argue or defend anything. "Your grandfather was very clear," Howard had said on the phone, and I could hear a kind of respect in his voice. "He wanted the record to speak for itself, in front of everyone, in my voice, not yours. He didn't want it to look like you were claiming anything. He wanted it to look like exactly what it is, which is a sale he made with a clear mind, 2 years ago." I'd never been so grateful for a stranger's precision. Pop had thought of everything, including the optics, including the fact that if I stood up and announced I owned the store, it would sound like a grab. But if a lawyer read a dead man's own words explaining a transaction already complete, it would sound like the truth. Which it was. I sat down at the long table that morning between an aunt and an empty chair, and I set my bag with the tin box at my feet, and I folded my hands, and I waited. Across the table, my mother and father and sister arranged themselves like a jury that had already reached a verdict. They had no idea they were the ones on trial. I have to back up one night, to a phone call from my father, because it's the only moment in this whole story where one of them came close to being human. He called me the evening before the reading, after my mother had presumably gone to bed, and his voice was different. Tired. Older. "Paige," he said, "it's your dad." We sat in silence a moment. Then he said, "I know you did all of it. With my father. The store. The nights. All of it. I know I didn't." His voice caught. "I couldn't. I want you to know it wasn't that I didn't love him. I just couldn't watch him get old. It scared me. And it was easier to let you do it and tell myself you were better at that kind of thing." That was as honest as my father had ever been with me. For a moment I thought something might actually change between us, and then he finished. "So I'm asking you, as your dad, don't fight your mother tomorrow. Let it be easy. Let us have our peace." And there it was, the same request as always, dressed up in a rare moment of truth. He could see what I'd done. He could name it, even. He just couldn't let that knowledge cost him anything, Couldn't let it move his hand at the table the next day. His honesty and his cowardice lived in the same sentence. "Dad," I said gently, because I did love him, and I could hear how hard the call was for him. "I'm not going to fight anyone, I promise. But I'm not going to lie about what's true either. Pop made sure I wouldn't have to." He didn't understand what I meant. He said goodnight, and I sat in the dark a while, grieving a father who could see me clearly and still chose not to. So that was the room I walked into. My mother, certain. My father, conflicted but seated firmly on her side, as always. Lauren, glowing with anticipation, already mentally spending. An aunt and an uncle there as witnesses and audience, and Howard Lind at the head of the table with a folder I knew the contents of and they did not. I'd waited 2 years for a room exactly like this one. Not to gloat, I want to be clear about that. I'm not a gloater, and Pop wasn't either. I'd waited for it because it was the one place in the world where the truth would finally be louder than my mother's opinion of me. A lawyer's office has a kind of gravity. People can't talk over a legal document the way they can talk over a tired granddaughter at Thanksgiving. In this room, for once, the facts would get to finish their sentences. I took the tin box out of my bag and set it on the table in front of me, closed, just sitting there. I saw Lauren's eyes flick to it. I saw my mother notice it and dismiss it. Some old candy tin, a sad sentimental keepsake from the failure daughter. I left it closed. I didn't need it yet. Howard had the originals. The box was just my insurance and my grandfather's. The truth in a tin, in case anyone ever pretended. Howard cleared his throat and welcomed everyone and offered his condolences, and my family arranged their faces into appropriate grief. Then he opened the folder and said the words I'd been waiting 2 years to hear a professional say in front of all of them. "We'll begin with the distribution of the financial estate, and then, at Mr. Whitaker's specific written request, I'll read a letter he prepared for all of you." I folded my hands. "Here we go, Pop." Howard read the financial will plainly, the way you read numbers that aren't yours to feel anything about. The investment accounts, the savings, the life insurance, all of it, totaling just over $6.9 million, divided between my parents and my sister Lauren. Then he came to my name. "And to my granddaughter, Paige Whitaker," Howard read, "the sum of $1. He actually had a crisp single-dollar bill paper-clipped to the page, because Pop had left it that way, and Howard unclipped it and slid it across the table to me. The room held its breath for half a second, and then my family did exactly what Pop knew they'd do. My mother laughed. It started as a small sound she tried to cover, and then it just came out of her, delighted, vindicated. "Oh, Paige," she said, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth. $1. Well, Lauren laughed too, that bright, cruel laugh, holding her own paperwork like a trophy. My father didn't laugh, but he looked at the table, which was its own kind of participation. And my mother, riding the high of being so completely right about me, leaned across the table and delivered the line one last time, savoring it, for the whole room. "I told you, honey, some kids just don't measure up." My father added quietly, almost kindly, "Go earn your own, Paige. It'll be good for you." I looked down at the single-dollar bill in front of me. I picked it up. I folded it once and put it in my pocket. And I said, in a perfectly calm voice, "Thank you, Howard." That was all. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for the tin box. I just sat there, holding my dollar, letting them have their victory lap, while across the table my mother dabbed her eyes and my sister beamed, and the whole room settled comfortably into the story they'd always told about me. And Howard Lind reached for the second envelope. "Before we conclude," Howard said, "Mr. Whitaker left a letter, and he was very specific that I read it aloud, in full, to everyone present." My mother waved a gracious hand, still glowing. "Of course," she said. "I'd love to hear Pop's words." She thought it would be a sentimental goodbye. Howard put on his reading glasses and began, and within 3 sentences the temperature of the room changed. "To my family," Howard read, in Pop's plain voice rendered in his careful one. By now, Howard has told you about the money, and I hope it does you good. I left it to you because I love you, and because I know you'll want it. But I need to explain the store, because the store was never the money's to give. Howard turned the page. 2 years ago, while I could still drive myself to this office, of my own free will and in my right mind, I sold Whitaker Hardware and the 40 acres behind it to my granddaughter Paige, for a fair price, on a promissory note she is still paying. Dr. Nessa Holt examined me that same day and put it in writing that I knew exactly what I was doing. It is not in this will, because it was never mine to will. It was already hers, bought and paid for, morning by morning, for 4 years. The laughter was gone now, completely. I gave Paige $1 in this will, Howard read on, not as an insult, but so that no one could ever say I forgot her. The truth is, she's the only one I didn't have to leave anything to, because she'd already earned the only thing that mattered. Howard lowered the page slightly and read the last line. The store stays with whoever opens it every morning. Signed, Earl Whitaker. For 1 full second nobody moved. Then my mother came up out of her chair so fast it scraped back and toppled. That's not possible, she said, and her voice wasn't laughing anymore, it was climbing toward a shriek. He wasn't in his right mind. She manipulated him. She lived out there alone with him for years, whispering, taking advantage of a sick old man. She was shaking, pointing at me across the table. This is theft. This is elder abuse. We'll fight it. Gary, tell them. My father said nothing. I looked at my mother, at the panic finally cracking the certainty she'd worn my whole life, and I said the only thing I'd been saving for 2 years. He wasn't manipulated, Mom. He was paying attention. Then I went quiet again and let the lawyer's office fill with the sound of her coming apart. Howard let her run out of steam, the way you let a kettle finish screaming, and then he did the thing my grandfather had built him to do. He calmly laid the documents on the table where everyone could see them. The buy-sell agreement, 2 years old, signed and notarized, Dr. Holt's medical certification, dated the same day, on her professional letterhead. Mrs. Whitaker, Howard said, not unkindly, you're free to consult an attorney, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you plainly. This transaction was completed 2 years ago, with contemporaneous medical certification of capacity, witnessed and notarized. It is, in my professional opinion, not a will to contest. It's a closed sale. My mother stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves if she hated them hard enough. My uncle, who'd come as a witness and said nothing all morning, picked up the medical letter, read it, and set it down with a low whistle. Well, he said into the silence, looking at me with something I'd never seen from that side of the family. Looks like she measured up after all. Lauren burst into tears, but not grief tears, furious ones, the tears of someone watching a prize get smaller in real time. So I get money and she gets the whole business and the land? She said. How is that fair? The store's worth more than the cash someday. Everybody knows the highway's coming. And there it was. The truth she didn't mean to say, that they'd known all along the store was the real fortune, and they'd been so busy mocking me for keeping it that they'd never imagined I'd end up holding it. My mother turned to me, grasping, and reached one more time for the old weapon. Go earn your own, she repeated bitterly, like it still had power. I looked at her steadily. I did, Mom, I said. Every morning at 6, for 4 years. My father put his face in his hands. Nobody laughed at me again. I could have left it there, let them sit in it, walked out a winner over a defeated family. But that's not what Pop built, and it's not who I wanted to be on the other side of this. So before I stood up, I said the thing I'd actually come to say. I'm not taking anything that's yours, I told them. The money is yours. Pop wanted you to have it, all 6.9 million of it, and I won't touch a dollar. I'm not contesting anything. I looked around the table, at my mother's wet, furious face, at Lauren's, at my father's bowed head. And the store is mine. It was a sale, it's done, and I'm still paying for it. I'm not getting rich. I'm getting up at 6. I picked up the tin box and put it back in my bag. Unopened, because I'd never needed it. Howard's Originals had done the work. If any of you ever want to come by the store, you're welcome. As family. Not as buyers, not as appraisers. As family. I let that sit. But the mornings are mine, and so is the name over the door, and nobody at this table gets to call me a failure again. Then I stood up. I was the first one to stand. For my entire life, I'd been the one who stayed late, who cleaned up, who waited until everyone else had what they needed before I moved. This time, I stood up first, and I picked up my bag, and I walked out of that office into the ordinary daylight of an ordinary Tuesday, with a folded dollar in my pocket and a 50-year promise on my shoulders. I drove straight to the store. It was the middle of the afternoon, but I unlocked the door anyway, and I turned on the lights, and I stood behind Pop's register and finally let myself breathe. Here's how it settled, in the months after. My mother did consult a lawyer, 2 of them actually, and both told her what Howard had told her, that a sale completed 2 years prior with medical certification of capacity is about as airtight as these things get. She'd be spending her inheritance to fight for something she'd lose. Even she could do that math. So the contest that my whole family assumed would happen simply never did. The store stayed mine, quietly, the way it had been mine on paper for 2 years already. Lauren took her share of the cash and did what Lauren does with money, which is watch it leave. But something shifted in her over that first year. She called me one evening, not for money, just to talk. And somewhere in the conversation she asked in a small voice, "What was he like at the end?" I wasn't there. I should have been there. It was the first true thing she'd said to me in a decade. I told her about the flood of '78, and the church social and the dock light. She cried, the real kind this time, and we talked for an hour. We're not close, my sister and I, but we're honest now. And honest is a foundation you can build something on later if you both decide to. My father started coming by the store. Not often, and we don't say much. But every few weeks his truck pulls in and he wanders the aisles, and sometimes he picks up a broom and sweeps without being asked, and I let him, because I think it's the only apology he knows how to make. My mother and I barely speak. She has never once said she was wrong about me, and I've stopped waiting for it, because some people can't afford the mirror, and a woman who measured her daughters in dollars for 60 years isn't going to learn a new unit of measurement at the end. I made my peace with that. It's lighter than you'd think, once you stop hoping. The store is still open. 6 in the morning, every morning, key in the lock, lights on, coffee going. I'm still paying the note. And I'll be paying it for years, and I am not a wealthy woman. I'm just the woman whose name is over a door that's kept a promise for 50 years. I keep Pop's torn half-sheet of order paper taped to the register where I can see it every morning. The store stays with whoever opens it every morning. Some days the farmers come in before dawn, and I think about how my family looked at this place and saw a dusty money pit. And Pop and I looked at it and saw the realest thing we ever had. I know which one of us was right. So did he. That's why there's a tin box in my closet I never had to open. A legacy doesn't go to the child you brag about at parties. It goes to the one who keeps showing up after everyone else has gone home. They handed me $1 and a smirk. Some kids just don't measure up. Go earn your own. And a tin box that proved every word of it wrong. If you've ever been the one who stayed while everyone else sent excuses and flowers, your presence was never worth less than their money. It was worth everything. Share this with someone who showed up when it counted. Tell me your story in the comments, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories.